Welcome to the Automate and Grow podcast, brought to you by Cloud Advisory.
Okay, welcome to another episode of Automate and Grow. This is episode 27, and I'm super honored today to have the one and only Rand Fishkin on with me, live, well, for me live, from Seattle. Rand, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure, Michael. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, I'm excited because you've had quite an exciting run over the last, I would say, I don't know, maybe 8-10 years, right? You're the Wizard of Moz, which is one of my favorite CEO titles ever. That was your how I originally got to know who you were. And now you've come out with, or are getting ready to launch a book in the next 8 days called Lost and Founder, and another startup. So I wanted to talk to you about what's going on and what's good, and find out some wisdom from the Wizard of Moz. I hope you don't mind if I call you that, because
it's totally fine. It's too punny to ignore.
It is excellent. So just for people that maybe aren't as excited and don't know as much about you as I do, but your background with Moz. Moz is like a tool set and a software company that you had started in the SEO space, right?
Yeah, that's right. So Moz basically makes software for professional marketers who focus on getting organic search traffic, and that means stuff like tracking rankings and helping with like building and keyword research and all of that. Yeah.
And then I guess recently in the last couple of years, you kind of stepped away from day-to-day operations. You have some exciting new projects going on. So I don't know what you want to talk about first, but I did get an advanced copy of Lost and Founder, so I've kind of already earmarked some parts of it that we can talk about. So.
Yeah. No, I'm happy to talk about Lost and Founder, which is basically, this, as we mentioned, 1/3 sort of journey and tell all about the experience of building a tech startup, including, raising capital and building a large team, and then all the painful things that go along with that, right? So, struggling with marketing and struggling with customer retention and product, and having to do layoffs, talking about depression, all sorts of topics that most folks don't address, even some of the deep financial sides of how much do founders really make, and why and how, and how does capital bias that?
I found that really interesting. It's one part of the book that is definitely really interesting, because I think, number one, you do provide some very tactical things, but I like it when people get into the numbers sometimes. And it was really interesting how you have this kind of a comparison between two people that start, one a services business, I believe is the way to describe it, or a consulting business, and then one a funded startup software business. And you really break it down in nice little 4 square boxes that I can understand. But it's really interesting to see how you show that not every dollar is worth a dollar to the founder, right? It was kind of interesting how you talk about that.
Yeah, it's weird because I think that consultants and services companies often feel this jealousy at product-based companies whose dollars are valued by kind of investors and acquirers so much more. Mm-hmm. And I think the part that is not always realized and recognized and internalized is that in a services company, you almost never have outside funding, which means you usually own 100% of that, or if you're 4 partners, you own 25% each. And what's crazy is to look at the outcomes of a lot of these product businesses where founders will own 5%, 6%, 2% of the business that they started and created. And sometimes that still means that they make some money on those deals, but it is a far cry from the perception that we have, because when we look in the media, right? I mean, what's on Hacker News today? Here's General Assembly sells to Adecco for $413 million.
Hey, that's exciting.
Insane, right?
Yeah.
That number seems so huge. And you look at a services company and you're like, oh man, similar size services company was sold for like $20 million. That founder probably is doing okay, but nothing like the folks behind, these product businesses. And that is not always true. In fact, very often, that's not true even at all. So I tried to talk about that and to talk about the process that we went through, because Moz was a consulting company that became a product software company. And yeah, there's plenty of challenges and issues around that. So yeah, trying to be very, very open and honest about my own experience, but then expanding beyond just that, so it's not all about me and Moz, right? But trying to say, hey, here's the lessons you can extract from this. And here's what that means for startup founders and company builders and entrepreneurs and early stage employees and people who join these types of companies, right? What can you expect and anticipate? What is startup life really like?
Well, I think there's a certain element, you've kind of hit on it, which is in a lot of ways, entrepreneurs are kind of the new heroes of society. There's a little bit of that, right? And I think a lot of ways, it's true. But you seem to approach it with a healthy skepticism as someone that's been through that grinder as well, though.
Well, and I think that founders get a very small number of founders receive all of the glory and sort of recognition, and a huge number of founders burn through their savings and burn through their free time and aren't really able to have the kinds of lives that they should be having and devote the kinds of energy to other pursuits, whether that's, things for their community or for their families or for their friends or just for themselves. And I feel that loss pretty keenly. I think that there's a very unhealthy culture of, hero worship in startup founder world.
So I guess, are you reluctant in this? Oh no, did you freeze? Oh, there you are, you're back. Are you reluctant as an entrepreneur? Like, you had I think a fairly public profile. You went from, as you said, kind of a services business, which there's lots of services business, especially, and then we have these different eras, right? Like SEO was a really big thing and still is important. There's probably like services business around pay-per-click, Google AdWords, as people clued into what that was capable of. And I think the last few years, like the effectiveness of the Facebook ads platform is, spawned another generation of people that are building, kind of one-on-one digital consulting type businesses. And sometimes they scale. But then, the product side, like, is it the entrepreneurial journey, or was it more the fact that you were like trying to scale a product business with outside influence? Like, would you do it again? Are you doing it again? Like, where do you kind of sit on this whole fence? Because you were very good at it, by the way. Like, you had a great, at least from the outside,
No. I mean, so Moz built what many folks from the outside would perceive as a very successful kind of business, right? I think the company did $47 million in revenue last year, and it has about 160 employees and 35,000 paying customers. And so there's lots of good-ish things, but once you raise venture capital, right, your obligation is to return a large multiple of that capital.
Makes sense.
Minimum 3 to 5 times, hopefully more like 10 or more. And to do that, Moz has got to find a way to become a billion-dollar company.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, there's a challenge.
Yeah, right? So, like, how does Moz get from $47 million in revenue to $120, $150 million in revenue, and hopefully very quickly, right? Because that growth rate is what investors value. Venture capitalists are looking for monopolies, basically, right? They want people to completely own and dominate a space and extract all of the possible value that they can from that space. And that's a very, very challenging model. Now, if you're an entrepreneur without that investment model, right? You've raised money from, let's say, angel investors or from friends and family, or you've taken on some debt. You can pay those back in a lot of different ways, and you can have a very successful business with $400,000 a year in revenue, $300,000 a year in revenue, right? Like that's an extremely successful business. If you have $300,000 in revenue and your expenses are only $50,000 a year, you will be making more than I ever did at Moz.
Wow, and I think so. That's kind of crazy. So I think that's part of the message that seems like the story you tell, which is that for the founder, those types of businesses don't always have that end result. So, But it sounds like you still love the entrepreneurial experience. You love the creation of building products and businesses, and you're getting ready to go down that path again with Spark Toro.
I'm a what do you call it, Michael? A glutton for punishment.
Or a masochist or glutton for punishment. Yeah.
Exactly. No, I mean, for me, the Spark Toro is a problem space that I am excited about, and it is something that I really want to solve. It's something that's been frustrating me for a long time as a marketer, and it's not really, SEO could not solve this particular problem, and so it wasn't a match for Moz. But I think that in addition to that, I also feel like I have a lot to prove. I want to build a business that has success in another type of way, one that doesn't necessarily need to follow the venture model to do that, one that can be a smaller team, a less monopolistic goal, and hopefully focus primarily on really just creating value for customers, more so than anything else. And so I love doing things like product design and launching and marketing, obviously, and I think that Spark Toro will let me do that.
So I'm not going to find you working at Amazon, in other words, right?
I mean, I have lots of friends. I mean, Seattle, right? I have lots of friends at Amazon,
right?
And lots of people who are like, well, hey, if you're thinking about maybe for the next couple of years you want to make some cash, like, why don't you come aboard? But it's just not a match. I need to have my beautiful tool shed out back of my house.
Oh, cool.
And my, start the new company. That's my passion.
So you're literally starting a new company in your garage or your tool shed?
Yeah, the house that we live in does not have a garage, so tool shed it is.
I love it. That's actually pretty cool. So as far as Lost and Founder, just to kind of touch on that, where would you say the biggest takeaway is from the book for people that want to grab it? And because I don't want to paint the picture that this is a sad book, because I think it's actually really interesting that, and I hope I didn't do that, because I think that, number one, you provide really valuable insight into here's just the reality of the road, and here's how you navigate it. And I think that's more important than I get how you got there, which is amazing in itself, because it's definitely like, it's a different type of journey. But
so one of the things that I worry about is that a lot of business books are, especially ones in the startup world, focus on this idea of I crushed it with my business, and here's how you can too.
Right.
And that is not Lost and Founder at all. Most business books also focus on a very specific sort of singular theme, right? So you can sort of tell everyone the takeaway or meme the book in a single sentence or two. Mm-hmm. And Lost and Founder is not that either. It's basically, this narrative that walks through these 19 chapters, and then extracts the lessons out from them. So that's, I think, a very different style of business book. If there's one way to describe it, it is, traditional Silicon Valley startup culture biases us to do a lot of dumb things. And this book can help you recognize and avoid them.
A friend of mine who's he was a Y Combinator graduate, and they raised a fair amount of money, and he exited his company, which is still ongoing, and just wasn't his thing either. So I think he said it that money validates a lot of things in the Valley, but it also probably covers up a lot of mistakes.
I mean, the model is intentionally, these 9 companies will die and this one will return all my funds. So, of course,
it's like predatory.
I mean, if you're an investor, right, you need those companies to go and die, because you can't afford to spend all this time on all these boards that are not going to turn into 5 and 10 and 50x returns for you. So it's a model that I think a lot of entrepreneurs idealize and worship, but one that is only right for some very, very specific kinds of high-risk taking companies that are seeking to be absolutely dominant, and that is actually not what most of startups should be. And I think, unfortunately, we don't have a culture of telling most startups what's right for them. And so maybe Lost and Founder can help to sort of start that.
I'm curious about like what you think about alternative means of, raising money, so to speak. Because I think that there's been some people that have been successful by doing things like crowdfunding. There seems to have been some other element around things that are as out there as cryptocurrency, and that seems a little fraught. But I'm curious what your thoughts are on maybe the future then, and if there's like another avenue that you would do it in the future that would be maybe a little more progressive, or if you would just go to old school and just kind of go family friends. Like, what do you think the way to go is?
Yeah. So for Spark Toro, I can tell you, I hope to be able to write about it in the near future, but in the process of raising a round that's mostly, in fact, pretty much exclusively angel investors. And the basic, story there is that I am not using a C Corp, not doing traditional stock and stock options for employees, but instead biasing to a model that basically gives a wide range of potential outcomes that are still positive for investors. So, basic story is like you can, for the folks who put money in, they're paid out with distributions, profits from it.
Oh, okay.
And so that is a very unusual model. The structure is a little complex to explain, but
yeah, non-traditional. That makes sense.
Those distributions can help folks make money even if the business never sells, and even if the business doesn't become a $50-100 million world beater. And I think that's exciting, right? I think folks should be excited to invest in those types of companies that have sort of longer odds of being successful because they're focused on profitability and on sustainable growth rather than unsustainable growth that requires, and demands rounds and rounds and rounds of funding.
Quarterly, your next chunk of cash, like your burn rate.
Yeah. Places that are like started in people's houses rather than expensive office spaces in San Francisco, and that type of model is something that I'm personally excited about, and I hope to be able to kind of open source our documents and make that something folks can go after.
Oh, that's a cool idea. That's really interesting.
Yeah. Crowdfunding is absolutely awesome. I think that folks have proven through Kickstarter and Indiegogo and Homespun crowdfunding campaigns that you can do extraordinary things with that, and that can be on top of or in addition to other sources of funding, or it can be instead of other funding. There's also, there's more debt instruments available today than there ever have been in the past. So things like Lighter Capital or NDVC are absolutely available for folks. There's some alternative funding sources. I talk about a few of these in the book, like Backstage Capital and some of the newer accelerators out there. So there's just a broadening scope of how you can fund and get a business off the ground. And nicely, it's cheaper than ever. Like, it really is. I'm sure you, Michael, you probably remember the days, if I'm judging your age correctly.
What are you trying to say?
You probably remember the days when, you needed nice office space because people were not.
Oh my God, yeah.
At coffee shops. Right?
I remember. I think I really like this kind of trend towards a couple of things. Like, one, if you look at the trends around freelancing, I think I've probably quoted this before, but like the numbers suggest that somewhere around 2030, the number of freelancers and employees will kind of cross. And it's like we're going back to this trend where people are, selling their skills. Now, there's challenges with that, obviously, but there's also opportunities. And opportunities, you talk about lifestyle and freedom to kind of do your thing, but also how, the structure of the organizations can be different. And I think what that's going to give rise to is like non-traditional workspaces. Like for my book, I was really fortunate that WeWork gave me free space all over wherever I wanted to go. There was a WeWork, right? And I think those are like really exciting spaces where there's neat stuff going on. I don't have to, work out of an office above a grocery store necessarily, or a variety store, And but then I also have this community element, right? So I think there's like these non-traditional structures that are going to come out of that too, which is, well, you're good at this and I'm good at this, and let's sell to each other. And I don't want to do those things, and I can't solve those problems, but you Rand can. So I think I didn't mean to do a rhyme there, by the way. Don't call your next company you Rand can. I think that's probably the worst thing I said in this whole thing.
I'm on it. I've made sure not to do that.
Trademark.
Yeah, no. I mean, the other exciting trends are, the cost of setting up and starting technology is just dirt cheap,
it's
right?
Come down
with
so
all the
much.
cloud providers sort of at war with each other over trying to get new business, and so many offers. I mean, if you're a startup, you can go to Amazon or to Google Cloud or to Microsoft, and they'll almost definitely offer you, $50,000 of credit to get started.
Really?
Oh my God, $50,000. That can get a ton of companies off the ground. And
oh my God, yeah, that's huge.
Not having to do anything, right? So, just a lot of interesting stuff there. And then I think there's also the trend of, a lower bar for formality. Folks are not, you don't have to put this on a suit and tie and go to a fancy office and in order to be taken seriously, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can be wearing your hoodie and in your tool shed. And
I put on a sportish jacket, but.
Yeah, right. And folks
and by the way, like, I know you, Rand, you're a fashionable guy, though.
I mean, I do have polka dots on my hoodie, but I think that those sorts of trends mean that startups are more accessible. Freelancing is more accessible than it's ever been, and cheaper to start. And I think that's a very exciting thing. But I worry that so many of us are railroaded into this one path of I need to be, Google, Facebook, Uber, or Airbnb, and you don't need to be those companies, and their path, what's right for them, is not necessarily right for you. So I think a lot of things, right? I complain in the book about the struggles that we've had with launching MVPs.
Right. Well, that's an interesting point.
These are very.
Because you made a point about that. That's right. And it was like that, an MVP, which is this trend around lean startup, right? Which is Eric Ries. And I think it's done a lot of really good things, which is it gets people to do stuff, I think, as opposed to sit back and pontificate. Like there's an element of that, right? Which is fail fast forward, but get information and the experimentation element. But you talk about using an MVP, which is a minimum viable product for people that maybe don't know, right? And you kind of make a point that sometimes it can be the death of your business if you put something out that's not even ready for the market, right?
Yeah, I think a big problem is that people form impressions based on their first experience with a brand or a person or a company. And if your first product is minimally viable, and as far as you're concerned, right, like you tested it with 10 or so folks and they can sort of eventually get the task done that they need to. It's not the greatest experience and they don't totally love it, but like it solves the problem, right? It solves this painful problem for them. When you put that out to market, hundreds of people, thousands of people might take a look and then remember you as, oh yeah, they're that really crappy version of that thing that I need to solve. I'm not
the answer.
In that. And unfortunately, so many organizations have adopted that. I mean, I think this is a thing that's killed Moz over and over and over again. Is there's this bias to like, we need to ship things, like we need to get this out the door, and that has really destroyed and cost us a ton of brand equity. In this
really?
space, right?
Wow.
And
okay.
perception. Oh yeah, absolutely. I think Moz is sort of perceived. Sometimes correctly, sometimes incorrectly, as having this very low quality product.
Really? Wow. See, that's interesting. I would not have guessed that.
Yeah, well, so in some spaces and not others, right? So like on the link side, it's perceived as having a very poor quality product compared to its primary competitors. On the ranking side, it's pretty good. On the keyword research side, it's good. On the crawl side, it's sort of in the middle, right? But those...
Unfortunately, got cut off for a second, but you were talking about, I guess, your own experience with trying to, launch quickly, and particularly use the example of Moz and how it's presented challenges around the quality of product that you've been able to come out with. And you talk about a different concept in your book, which is the EVP as opposed to the MVP, right? And I don't know if you want to expand upon what that is.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that one of the challenges that Moz has had is we launch a product early. That product gets much better over time, but everyone's association is with the version that came out that they first saw, right? And so 6 months after you release an MVP, you might have a really solid, amazing product out in the market. Guess what? Everyone in that market is not going to give you a try. They're going to use your competitors because they remember the product when it was shipped.
And you're explaining the story of how you got to a good product, and it's not resonating necessarily. It's exhausting to have to...
I mean, you know what I never see in the press? I never see in the press, product that we reviewed 6 months ago has now become much better.
It's so awesome. You should get it now.
No one writes that story because that's not a story. That doesn't resonate, right? What resonates is extraordinary product came out or crappy product came out, right? And that is what is going to be amplified and what's going to become, sort of part of human memory around these topics and brands. And so you have to decide. You have to decide if you're a company who, hey, your audience is so small, no one's paying attention to you anyway, so you know what? You can launch that MVP and scale it up because you're an early stage startup that nobody's heard of. Doesn't matter. You have 10 customers anyway, fine. If 5 people's reputation, perception of you is poor, that's okay. You're only talking to them. Okay. Different between that and you reach tens or hundreds of thousands of people with your email marketing and your brand. And so your launches are watched by a community of folks who will grow very quickly to not trust you, not use your stuff if it's core. And so the idea of this EVP is take your MVP and launch it internally only. Have only 5 or 10 or a handful of people who have private beta access to it, and wait until you get those 6 months of improvements that you were going to get when it was public anyway, and then launch it publicly and get the extraordinary return that you can do. And so I talk about a product that we did at Moz that was just like this, and basic story with that is we had this product. We were supposed to launch it in January. I showed it to a bunch of folks who didn't love it as is, but thought it had potential. So we waited 4 more months, and when we did launch it, it was awesome, right? It just had a huge positive impact. And now it's kind of perceived as a leader in its field, which is fantastic. That's Curious Explorer, but yeah.
So how much of Lost and Founder was for you versus me?
My editor kept asking me that, right? She'd be like, I know you want to put this in, but does it serve the reader?
How dare you ask
so
that?
I think that was, yeah. So I think that was a constant battle that we had of kind of, hey, I want to get this off my chest. And her saying, yeah, but will the reader really find it valuable? And so we tried to cut a lot of that stuff, and yeah, hopefully it's
no, I think it's a great book. I think that for me, when I started writing a book, it was more like, listen, this is in my brain and I need to get it out. It needs to be in the world, whether people accept it or not. And I didn't want to get locked into it just always being a non-book. It had to become a book, right? So I'm always curious when people write, what the process is always interesting. It's a little different than maybe stuff that we normally talk about on Automate and Grow, but I'm always kind of curious because you've written a weighty tome, my friend, which I think everything so far has been excellent, which I really like. So
I'm thrilled to hear it. Yeah, well, I mean, my big goal here is, look, I made a lot of mistakes building this business, and hopefully if you're building something, you can at least learn from those and not make exactly the same ones. You're going to make some mistakes, I guarantee it, but hopefully not these ones.
And relating back to our discussion on the MVP versus the EVP, I like it. The thing I worry about, I think, number one, the MVP, the concept was really just to validate a product or a market, right?
Yeah.
That was really what I think people maybe miss, or, that's the stage they don't get past, which is possible, because it probably gave a new batch of people a new way to come up with product that, look at me, I'm not a software developer, but I've developed, with my team I built, over 100 and some odd apps. is that possible 20 years ago? No way, right? There's just no possible way. So it's definitely, it's part of the equation, I think, of making it more accessible. But what you're saying also makes sense, which is, okay, now do you want it to actually be viable?
Absolutely.
You want it to be entirely viable, the new EVP.
Yeah. Not just viable, but hopefully worthy of amplification.
That makes sense.
Is, I think a lot of companies have made a lot of products. The problem that they've almost always had is getting customers. If you want to get customers, you need a product that earns amplification, right?
Interesting. So I think that's an interesting question for me because, and I want to be respectful of your time. So, you've successfully scaled a business, and presumably it's not just with money, but you've attracted money because of also your ability to get attention. And I think that's part of the, the voodoo that people see around SEO is I'm trying to get attention, and this is, something I have to do. And I'm curious what your thoughts are on that, or what, is that like your superpower is to be able to get attention for things that are valuable and have people buy in? Because I think that's very, very difficult, I think, and you've been a master at it, really.
Yeah, I do think so. I think that a lot of founders find that they have strengths and weaknesses, and definitely one of my weaknesses is software engineering, and absolutely one of my strengths is marketing. And I think that on the marketing side, that has come through lots of trial and error and experience, but also recognizing that people behave in irrational but predictable ways, right? So it's irrational to dismiss a product that might be great because 6 months ago you tried it and it was terrible, right? That's not a rational reason not to use a product, but it's consistent. It is predictable. You can identify that's the case, and therefore, something like biasing to an EVP when you have a large market as opposed to an MVP is probably a really good idea for your launch. Same thing is true about, or similar truth about doing any kind of web marketing, right? It's often the case that things that are new get much more attention, much more links, much more traffic, much more, tweets and Facebook shares and all those kinds of things than something that is old but very useful and good. And so if you have created a wonderful resource and you're wondering, gosh, why isn't it attracting attention? Maybe think about updating and relaunching it, calling it V2, calling it the 2018 edition, right? Making it new again, so that so that you trigger that sharing of newness that the internet loves. And that has been very successful for us as well, right? Taking an old guide, updating it every year, relaunching. So I would say, there's a long list of these kinds of things, and you need to have sort of empathy for and understanding of how people behave in order to do a great job with those marketing tactics.
I think I'm terrible at it.
I mean, you have a very well followed podcast with a lot of impressive guests. I looked through your past talks. I think maybe you're underselling yourself there.
Maybe. I think I'm good at presenting ideas, and I think what I have a lot of respect for you, and one day I would love to pick your brain on small things, not everything, but is I think what you have is that empathy, and I think it was very surprising to me how vulnerable you were about your experiences at Moz, and you've built some of that into the book. But I think that's also that vulnerability that has allowed you to have that empathy where you understand how to get that attention. And I think maybe that's where you and I probably are very different. I can have empathy like this, and
well, this is what we'll have to do. We're gonna practice being vulnerable. You're gonna tell me about all the things that scared you as a kid that still scare you today. You're gonna tell me about all the nerdy and weird stuff that you do, and then you're gonna share that. And by sharing it, you're gonna feel more comfortable with it, and then you're gonna feel like, oh wait, maybe I can have sympathy and empathy for all these other people. I don't know. We'll do a therapy wrap session next time.
There you go. Oh my God. That might be that could be a really short conversation or a really long. I don't know. Well, listen, I do want to be respectful of your time, Rand. I'm really excited about the book coming out. And actually, I feel bad. We didn't talk about, can you want to explain what Spark Toro is and what problem you're solving? And then maybe how people can get in touch with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So Spark Toro is my new website. It has a blog, and you can get in touch with me there. The business itself is going to be about helping marketers find the channels, sources, publications, and people that their audience actually engages with. So whether you're trying to reach people who are interested in classic cars, or interior decorators on the West Coast of the United States, or folks who are setting up a new company and you need payroll software, figuring out where do they actually hang out online, what channels do they engage with, what communities are they participating in, what events do they go to, what podcasts are they listening to, who do they follow on Twitter, all those kinds of things is what Spark Toro is trying to help with. And hopefully, probably a product in 9 to 12 months. So
9 to 12 months. Okay.
Yeah.
And so so the idea behind that is, like, for example, and this is something I haven't done yet, which is if someone else has my audience, so to speak, and has their ear, then there's ways that I can engage those people to try and reach that same audience. And it sounds like you're building a tool to enable. Yeah,
but you can only go engage with them if you know who they are and where they are. And that's the problem I'm trying to solve.
Great. Okay.
That's a real challenge.
I would love to be a beta tester.
Awesome. All right, I'll sign you up.
All right, I'm going to wrap up with 2 things. One, I want to know how you, Rand Fishkin, are changing the world.
Oh boy. Well, I hope I'm making folks kinder. That is absolutely something that I have worked really hard to do. In all sorts of aspects of business and life. And I also hope that I'm helping to make everyone, or a lot of people, better at marketing.
I need all the help I can get. I'm going to wrap with one final thing. And if you've watched any of the episodes, you know that when we talk to really interesting guests, we like to meet other interesting guests. And what I'd like you to do is nominate someone that you think would be a great guest for Automate and Grow. We usually talk to experts or entrepreneurs. And we can either talk about their entrepreneurial journey or one particular aspect of their expertise. And usually the first name that pops to your head is the best one. So I'm curious who you would like to nominate for Automate and Grow.
Well, there's an absolutely wonderful, phenomenal marketer. She's in the PR world, but has a lot of overlap into SEO and digital marketing as well. Her name's Lexi Mills. If you haven't talked to her, you absolutely should. She is she's an incredible talent and a super fun, really unique personality too.
Great. Oh, well, that sounds, I'm sold. So we will take that nomination and look for an introduction to Lexi Mills. Lexi, you've been nominated to appear on an episode of Automate and Grow. Rand, I want to thank you again. I'm really excited to have your book come out and for me to finish reading it. And whatever I can do to help you with Spark Toro, if you need testers, I'm there. And awesome. Thank you so much for joining me today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
No problem. This has been another episode 27 of Automate and Grow, and we'll look for everyone on episode 28.
This has been an episode of the Automate and Grow podcast.